Now, you might remember, those of you who were here last night, after the Mass, I introduced people very quickly, and it was pretty quickly because we knew we would be meeting people for a little longer today, and I mentioned the Honorable James Nicholson, whose picture appears on page 7 of your program. And I said some things about him that were kind of once over lightly. I spoke about him being a soldier and a diplomat and a public servant, and referred to him as being a distinguished Catholic gentleman. That he most certainly is. And I think it's particularly important for me to note that in his present capacity as Secretary of Veterans Affairs, he happens to be in New Zealand a day or two away from Anzac Day, which is so important to us. In his present function, this former soldier, and I should tell you, I have read a great deal about Secretary Nicholson, and I've just picked out one or two highlights to whet your appetite, so to speak. He graduated from West Point Military Academy in 1961. He did 8 years of active duty as a paratrooper, qualifying as a ranger and earning a Bronze Star in Vietnam. He retired from the service with the rank of colonel after 22 years in the Army Reserve, and his active military career was followed by a law practice and successful ventures in real estate development. And yet, as the biography notes say, Jim Nicholson would likely say that his greatest achievement was persuading Suzanne Marie Farrell, a wonderful woman and distinguished artist, to marry him. They raised 3 children, even as Jim was becoming involved in politics, becoming Colorado's representative on the Republican National Committee in 1986 and elected chairman of the RNC in 1997. He served through those tumultuous 2000-year elections, after which President Bush nominated him to be the ambassador to the Holy See. And just to put something in perspective in the light of our own interest in matters to do with Anzac Day and the military, Mr. Nicholson is the Secretary of Veterans Affairs in the United States. He is the principal advocate for veterans in the United States government, and he directs the nation's second largest cabinet department. He's responsible for a nationwide system of healthcare services and benefit programs and national cemeteries for America's veterans and their dependents. Veterans Affairs employs approximately 230,000 people at hundreds of medical centers and clinics and nursing homes and benefit offices and national cemeteries throughout the country. And the VA budget for fiscal year 2005 is more than $70 billion. And that's an amount greater than the budgets of 24 states combined. Now, I can't think of a safer pair of hands than for the affairs to be in than those of Jim Nicholson. He is a distinguished Catholic gentleman, and we are very proud to have him here.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for that most generous introduction. Thank you for the warm welcome. Suzanne and I are truly enjoying ourselves in your beautiful country. This morning we had a meeting with Minister Rick Barker, who, as you know, heads up your Department of Veterans Affairs. We were privileged to lay a wreath at the Auckland War Memorial Museum, and we just momentarily came flying over here from a visit to the Ron Furley Veterans Center, where they're over there with the great veterans and preparing for Anzac Day there as well. You know, I've been very well greeted and escorted here, and one of the first people I met was Bill Moore. And he's been so kind to us. But I said to him, I said, Bill, why did you invite me to come to speak to New Zealand to this Eucharistic convention? And Bill said, well, you know, every convention needs a cross. So we thought you would come and be our cross. No. Seriously, what he said was, he said, I think it was an act of the Holy Spirit. He said, we were looking for an American layman who would be willing to come and witness his faith with us, and one that has some responsibility in your country. And he said, I think we got your name off the internet. But no matter how you did that, we're delighted to be here. When he mentioned it being an act of the Holy Spirit, made me think of a story. As Kevin has said, I was the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican for 3.5 years, and I'll talk to you about that tomorrow. But when the Holy Father died, the president invited me, because we'd been back home by then for 2 months, invited me to go to the funeral. And on Air Force One was President Clinton, as well as President Bush, the 41st. President Clinton kept saying to me, Nicholson, tell us who the next pope's going to be. And finally I said to him, I said, well, Mr. President, I said, the Holy Spirit is not talking to me today about that. He said, no, come on now. He said, I know you used to have to report to the State Department, which is true. Every quarter we would have to give our best guess about who the successor to John Paul II would be. But finally, President Clinton said to President Bush, he said, George, he said, make Nicholson tell us who the next pope's going to be. This is a true story. And the president turned to me and he said, well, have you got anything you want to offer on that? And I said, well, yes, sir. I said, I'll tell you who I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be Cardinal Ratzinger. And he said, really? And Clinton really zeroed in on that then. And he said, why do you think it's going to be Ratzinger? And so I gave him my rationale, which was he was the dean of the College of Cardinals, one of the most respected and well-known cardinals in the College of Cardinals, a great man who had fidelity to the ecclesiastical doctrine of the church, a scholar, very humble, a Christ-like person, and he was 76 years old. Because in my thinking, they would pick an older pope as a man coming right behind a superstar. And that was just me. It was my opinion. And President Clinton bought that and went immediately to the rear of Air Force One and started talking up to the press that the next pope was going to be Cardinal Ratzinger. And so I was more of a prophet than I thought. But it's indeed humbling for me, and this is, by the way, a new experience for me to appear before a group like this in New Zealand or anywhere else, in America or anywhere, and it's humbling because I'm not used to I'm used to talking about political things, matters of state, matters of veterans and so forth, but not in a more personal way, a matter of my faith. But I welcome this opportunity because it's good for me, I think, and good for my faith to do this and to prepare to share it with you. And it's humbling. And when I say humbling, it makes me think of that old story about Winston Churchill. You know, one time somebody said to him, he said, well, you can say whatever you want to, Sir Winston, about that Clement Attlee, but you have to say he's a humble man. And Churchill says, yeah, you do, because he's got a lot to be humble for, he said. But we're here today, I'm here to talk the family and the cross. And I've chosen to do that in a manner of just telling you about me, my story, my family, and our cross, and how we have striven in our family to deal with that and what it's meant, and and hopefully what it may mean to you in the lessons that there may be there. It starts out with, I will tell you about my father, because my father was a very chronic alcoholic, was an itinerant man who had great potential, who never used it. He never went to high school. He was born into a wealthy family. My grandfather was an immigrant from Scotland, had been staked to some good land in the heartland of the United States in Iowa, and he had a big family. And my grandfather expanded his land holdings. He thought it was good to buy every farm in sight, so he borrowed a lot of money. And when the Great Depression came to the United States, he couldn't pay the loans at the bank, and the banks came and got all the farms. So all of the people, including his children, including my father, who had been raised in a very comfortable, wealthy environment, all of a sudden had nothing. And by then, my dad was a young adult, and he tried farming himself, and they had 2 dry years in Iowa without rain. He had, by then, married to my mother, and I think had 2 children at that time. And he in effect, gave up, and he took up drinking and really never got over it. But did continue to have children, so that they had 8 children. 1 died. And when the war was over, housing was at a real premium, and we were living in a rental house in a town in Iowa, and the rent was not paid, and the landlord, who was a kind man, had to evict us. So we went out to a farm way out in the country and lived in an abandoned house. And when we moved there, it didn't have any windows in it. It never had plumbing, and it didn't have electricity for several years. And there we were. At that time, I think by then there were 6 of us children, and my dad continued to drink, would be gone for periods of time. We often did not have anything to eat, and it was very humiliating, because my mother, who didn't go to college but did go to high school, was a valedictorian in her class, took Latin all 4 years, was a Latin scholar. And she somehow kept us together, and she used to read the Bible to us around a kerosene lantern. And she used to say to us, in the depths of our deprivation and humiliation, because the people around us, while not rich, were not poor. They were comfortable. They were farmers. They were industrious people. So we had to go to this school. It was a 1-room school, and once I had to wear 2 different shoes, which was very humiliating. And kids, can be mean and without meaning to be, but made fun of me. And it was very degrading and humiliating, as it was for my siblings. But my mother somehow used to gather us around this kerosene lamp and read the Bible to us, taught us the Our Father and the Hail Mary, because we were out in the country. We couldn't at that time go to church, and we didn't have a car. But she used to say to us, she said, if you will work hard, study hard, and pray hard, she said, you will have a chance in America. And if you will maintain your dignity as a human being and your importance. And that was a challenge because of the conditions and the deprecation that there was with living the way that we did. When Christmas season came, we would have to take the Christmas tree from the school home, and that became our Christmas tree. And there wasn't such a thing as gift exchange. And it was pretty tough. In a few years out there, we finally got a car, Model A Ford car that carried 2 people. We would put 3 people in it. And we would draw straws to see who could go into this little town 5 miles away to go to Sunday Mass. It was called Struble, Iowa. And if you were lucky, every other month you'd get lucky with the draw, and you could go to Mass on Sunday and get to go into this little town which had 90 people in it. We then moved into that little town, and it had 99 people, because by then we had 7 kids, and it had a 2-room school. And it opened new opportunities for people like me, because I then I started selling Christmas cards and greeting cards to people. I got a paper route, and there were more opportunities for work, and so we could help support the family. But things deteriorated. My older brother, who had been living with my grandmother, came back because my mom was trying to keep the family together. And he finished high school, and he did a very good job in high school, and he wanted to go to college. And my dad said, "No way are you going to college, you're going to work." And he wanted him to support the family. And my mother said, and I remember this like yesterday, she said, "Over my dead body is he not going to college. He is going to college. That's the way up in this country and in this life, and he is capable, he is going to college." And she won the argument. And he went off, and but during that year, things really got bad. My dad got terribly. He had to be admitted to the asylum of the state. It was in Cherokee, Iowa. And my brother came home after the first year of college in the spring. My dad was in the hospital. We had a lot of little kids, and we had no food, and although we were praying feverishly, which we did throughout, and in fact, from the time my mother taught me to pray the Hail Mary, I cannot remember a day in my life that I haven't said the Hail Mary at least once, and sometimes I flood the Holy Mother with Hail Marys, probably to the point that I'm a nuisance, but I've been doing that since I was very small, and I continue to do it. And on Memorial Day, spring, for us that's in May, it rained 8 inches in this little town of Struble. And it flooded out the railroad system that came through the town. And I was 15 years old, I weighed 120 pounds, and I prayed that I could get a job on the railroad. I went up and visited with the district engineer, a big old Greek twirling his watch on his leather thong, and he looked at me. And he kind of, "What do you want, son?" And I said, "Sir, I'd like a job." And he sized me up, and he said, "Well, I'm sorry." He said, "You're too young." He said, "This is really hard work. It's work meant for men." So I walked away, and I went around the block and came back to this little depot where we were, and I had prayed just fervently on that. And I came back, I looked him right in the eyes, and I said, "Sir, I not only want a job, I need a job." And he looked at me, and he somehow got it. And I don't, again, maybe the act of the Holy Spirit, but he said, "Do you have a Social Security number?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he looked at me again with great doubt, but he said, "Okay, get on that motor car." And I did, and I went out and worked 20 hours that day without gloves. My hands became like hamburger. But I started making money at union wage. And I ended up working the whole summer with these big men out of Minneapolis and St. Paul. They were called Gandhi dancers, and we rebuilt all that track. And with that money, I was able, of course, to buy food for the family, get my brother back to college. I bought a car. I wasn't old enough to own a car, but I bought a car. My dad came out of the treatment facility, the asylum, and was sober for several months, and drove the car and got a job, and things turned around markedly. It was a clear answer to our prayer. It also helped me develop physically, so that I really became a pretty good football player, and I also was playing baseball. And so when it came time for me to graduate from high school, my grades were pretty good. We'd gone into a town 8 miles away to school by school bus. And I was lucky enough to get an appointment to go to West Point, the United States Military Academy. And that really helped to define the rest of my life. The military academy and its motto is duty, honor, and country. And I think one could add to that God, because there was a wonderful opportunity there for spiritual development as well. And I took the opportunity. You could be relieved of going to marching to breakfast if you went to daily mass, which I did, and and they had a wonderful cadre of chaplains there. So it was another of those great answers to our prayer. But when I got there, I felt very inadequate, as you might imagine, coming from when I did. And I came through New York City. Now, I came from a town of 99 people. There are probably, what, 1,200 people in this room or so. And so there were 99 in my town. That's what I was used to. And I came through New York City, and I looked up at these canyons, and I had to find my way to the Port Authority bus depot to take a bus up the Hudson River to go to West Point. And I thought that everybody else there was a you know, a 9,000-pound gorilla and brilliant and everything else. But I eventually found out that they were much like me. But the one thing that was different was this town I came from, and my classmates used to tease me about it, not thinking there was such a town that could be that small. So two of them promised when we graduated, if we graduated, that they would come to Struble and see it. And by the grace of God, we did graduate, and they did come, but they were never convinced that it was called Struble. They thought it was called Resume Speed, because those were the only two signs on either side of the railroad track. But then got commissioned into the Army and went into the infantry and became an airborne ranger, as Kevin said, and went off then within a few years to war in Vietnam. And while in Vietnam, I was with an infantry scout battalion. I know there's several Vietnam veterans here with us that I've met. And we moved about a good bit up in the Central Highlands, and it was often quite dangerous, but I felt it was important. And I prayed for two things. I prayed, one, that I would live, and two, that if I did live and went home, that I would find a woman, because by then I wanted to settle down and get married. My prayers were answered. I lived, obviously, and within 3 months I met this beautiful woman, Suzanne Farrell, who lived right next door to the military academy at West Point, where I was then posted. And a year later, we got married. And the Army, having sent me to graduate school at Columbia University, got very interested in the law and decided I wanted to be a lawyer. So by then, Suzanne and I had a 9-month-old son, and we decided to leave the Army and all the security that went with that. I was a major by then. And we moved out to Denver, Colorado. I didn't have a job, I didn't have a place to live, but I was admitted to law school at the University of Denver. And we had great faith and optimism about the future of our capabilities by then. And we moved out there, and I went to law school full-time, had a full-time job, managed an apartment building, and was in the Army Reserve. And by then we had our second child, and Suzanne was there in a town where she knew no one, 2 little boys in diapers, and a father who was not home very often. I'd leave about 6:30 in the morning, get home at 10:30 at night. But I was able to get a good job with a law firm. After 2 years, they made me a partner, and I practiced law then for 6 years, and then entered into business and became the developer of residential communities. Things were going well. I decided to buy a bank. That went well, so we bought 2 more banks. I got involved in oil and gas, and all of a sudden, the bottom fell out of all this. Not a recession, but a depression hit the Rocky Mountain West, including Denver, and all of a sudden we were gasping for air, and not at all certain that we could survive without having to file for bankruptcy. And once again, our world just changed upside down. But the thing that was there again and sustained us as a family was our faith. And prayed fervently, and never, by the way, did prayed for material enrichment for its sake, but did indeed pray that it could keep from going bankruptcy, work with the creditors, and work it out. And again, by the grace of God, we were able to do that. Some of them doing things we never thought they would, allowing us to term out payments and to stay in business. And there's a big difference between going bankruptcy and nearly going bankrupt. And we just nearly went. And we're able to stay in business, and then the market cycled, came around, and we survived. Meanwhile, I had gotten quite involved in politics because I believed as a Catholic and a graduate of West Point and really imbued with this sense of duty and honor and country, that if you didn't like the way things were going, you should get involved and not just snipe and comment. And so did get involved. And one thing led to another, became elected as Colorado's representative to the Republican National Committee, then was elected the vice chairman, and in 1997, after a national campaign in all the 50 states, I was elected the chairman and CEO of the Republican National Committee. We have 55 million members of the Republican Party in all corners of the United States. And my mission then, this was in 1997, being the head of one of the two great parties in America, and I might say, by the way, that not all my family were Republican. I mentioned that we were poor Irish Catholics growing up in Iowa, and our families were Democrats, New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt Democrats at that time. But little by little, we began to see that this old Democrat Party was changing, and it was leaving us. It was getting wrong on the social issues and so forth. And so I became a Republican, and as did now 6 out of 7 of my, there's 7 kids of it, and 6 of us are now Republicans. But my mother went to her grave as a Democrat. Lord have mercy on her soul. But she used to tease me, and my wife's parents were both Democrats, and Suzanne's mother still is, although she has voted for President Bush both times. But the job then, as the head of the party, was to win the White House. And so I set about and realized immediately that the morale of the Republican Party in 1997 in the United States was very low, because we had just been wiped out in the 96 election in November when President Clinton beat Senator Dole. And one of the things you had to have was money to run the party. I went to New York City, and all I got in New York City was lectures about how this party is never going to win another national election because you're too hung up on abortion and guns. Then went to the left coast, the west coast of the United States, and got the same thing, no money but lectures. So finally then consolidated and went back to the base of the party to try to raise money and small contributions. And we had that year 19 special elections in 97, and we won every one of them. Every one of them. Mayor's race in New York City, mayor's race in Los Angeles, several governor's races, several special congressional races. And we won every one of those races, and we did it based on the message of smaller government, lower taxes, and consistency on these values and social principles. One of the many, many interesting things that happened, I never forget coming to work one morning, and my press staff rushed to the door to greet me early in the morning, and they used to call me boss, and they said, "Boss, you're not going to believe what just happened." I said, "Well, try me." And they were right. I didn't believe it. On the Today Show that morning, Father Andrew Greeley, I don't know if any of you in here have heard of Andrew Greeley or read any of his books, but he's a priest out of the Diocese of Chicago who is given to writing novels and making a lot of social and political commentary. He appeared on the prime morning talk show, which is called the Today Show, and a woman named Katie Couric was interviewing him about his new book, and she said, "Father Greeley," she said, "you really come down hard on Republicans in this book." She said, "Do you really believe that strongly about Republicans?" he said, "Katie, I'm not at all sure, but what I think it's a mortal sin for a Catholic to be a Republican." So help me God. And so now here I am, the new Catholic chairman of the Republican Party, obviously living in sin, but my faxes and emails and telephone is just going wild because the people out there, say, "What are you going to do about this?" Well, I didn't know what to do about it, so I prayed, as I did and do all the time, for help from God. And somehow the idea to call Cardinal George, who's the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, occurred to me. I'd met him before. I called him. He said, "Well, Nicholson, I don't know how to advise you. I don't know much about your job." He said, "But I would do with Father Greeley what I do with him is ignore him. He would love to get into a battle with you." And so I said, "Well, I'll try that, Your Eminence." And I did, and within 24 hours it kind of smoothed out. And we were on to other things. But we then, having organized ourselves, the party chose its nominee, which was George W. Bush. Our job then was to raise the resources in support of that nominee, that ticket, for us to get the message of the Republican Party out to the people of the United States, and then get them to turn out and to vote. Having been persuaded by that message, those set of principles and values that we stood for as a party. And we knew going into the election in November of 2000 it was going to be a very close election. The country is very evenly divided. We knew we had a chance to win, and we had a good chance that we could lose, too. Murphy's Law continued to operate. One of our goals, and I don't know how closely you follow this, but there's been in Republican politics, in politics in the United States, there's been a man named Ross Perot, a very patriotic fellow who ran for president, as you may know, in '92, ran again in '96. My goal was to keep him from running in 2000 and to get him to endorse our nominee. Well, to do that, I got to know him. I called on him in Dallas. He's an extraordinary person, and I'm not going to take all the credit for it, but he decided that he would not run, and he eventually decided that he would support the nominee of the Republican Party, George W. Bush. So then we worked on getting a time for him to announce this, because this was pretty significant news in the United States, because there'd been a lot of friction between Perot and the Bush family. And so we organized it. He was going to announce it live on Larry King Live, the television show on CNN. Well, we had all this set up, and at exactly the same time, President Bush was giving a speech at the fairgrounds in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was with him there, and with Perot in New York, when the press had developed the information that the president, as a young man, had a little peccadillo with the driving, in the time that he was consuming alcohol, shall we say, and they found that he had too much, and he got a ticket for this, and that was the news of the day. And at exactly that time, when Perot was on the set endorsing President Bush was in Milwaukee explaining this, and of course all the news in America went to Milwaukee. So the news of Perot never reached the American people. And just another example of the things that can happen. But we got to election night, and it looked like we had won the election. People were congratulating me. We had a big party in a hotel in Washington, D.C., and we actually got in the car to go home because I was going to appear at the National Press Club the next morning. When pulling up in front of our house, they came out with a special announcement and said that Vice President Al Gore had refused to concede the election and wanted a recount. Well, that then put that election into a cocked hat, and as you all know, for 35 days we didn't know who was going to become the next president of the United States. And as you can imagine, I was doing a lot of praying during that time, well, we had the recount in Florida and trying to find out whether it was a hanging Chad or a tilted Chad or a suspended Chad. And we had several court decisions out of Florida and 2 out of the United States Supreme Court. And then we won the election after 35 days, and then the second Supreme Court decision, President George W. Bush had been elected President of the United States. Well, fast forward a few months later, after we arrived in Rome, and I will talk to you about Rome tomorrow, being the ambassador to the Vatican, but we did go to our first dinner party, this diplomatic reception, and this archbishop, very articulate, impressive person, started talking to me, and his name was Novak. Well, he was from Poland, which is a common name in Polish, as you know, and we were having this nice visit, and I said to him finally, I said, "What do you do here in the Roman Curia, Your Excellency?" And he looked at me with a sparkle in his eye, and he said, "Well, Ambassador," he said, "I make saints." And sure enough, he was the secretary of the Congregation for the Cause of Saints. So I looked at him and tried to get a little sparkle in my eye, and I said, "Your Excellency, how do I get on your good side?" And he said, "Well, Ambassador, you could start with a miracle." And so a few months later, I was back home in Colorado telling that story, and some of my Democrat friends said, "Well, you already have your miracle, Nicholson," which they were referring to, of course, the election. But we then began to organize the government, and Suzanne and I prayed about what it was if we wanted to continue to do government service, because we were now in a position to do that, having been the chairman of the party that won the election, and we decided that we would indeed like to represent the president abroad. So the president asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, "I'd like to be an ambassador and represent you abroad." He said, "Great." And he mentioned a country. And obviously my face didn't show this exuberance that he was anticipating, because it was a big, very prestigious country for someone to be the ambassador of the United States to. And he kind of looked at me and he said, "Does that sound good to you?" And I said, "Well, with all respect, Mr. President-elect," and then I'm not calling him George anymore, I'm calling him President-elect. "With all respect," I said, "we would really like to represent you to the Pope, to be the ambassador to the Holy See." He said, "Really?" And we said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I'll have to think about that." And 2 days later, he called back and said, you still want to go to the Vatican?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, I want you to go to the Vatican." And so that was how that came about. And we then did what you have to do, is get yourself confirmed by the United States Senate, go through all the financial reporting and so forth, and were dispatched to Rome. And I presented my credentials to the Holy Father at Castel Gandolfo, his summer palace, on 9/13 of 01, 48 hours after 9/11. And when we arrived, the Pope was ambulatory. He came to the door, greeted me, invited me to come in, led me to a chair, and just he and I sat there and had about a 25-minute visit. But it was a somber time, and he said, "I've been praying and thinking about what happened in New York, in Washington, and Pennsylvania 48 hours ago." And he then took his finger and he kind of said, he said, "That was an attack not just on you," meaning the United States, but then cupped his arms and said, "That was an attack on humanity." And he said, humanity is going to have to do something about those people who would kill in the name of God. And that became a very significant moment in history at that point, anyway, because the Vatican News Service put that out, And that set the predicate for the support of the Holy See for us to go after these stateless terrorists who, as you know, operate by attaching themselves to the intestinal wall of sovereign states and then operate out of that and then want to be protected by that sovereignty of those states where they have decided to hole up in their cowardly way. But the Pope got that, and he thought that through carefully, and that was his message to me. Now, Iraq became a different story, and we'll talk about Iraq tomorrow when we talk about leadership and the cross, and I will tell you about our time as U.S. Ambassador to the Vatican. But what I'd like to do is to conclude by trying to reflect with you on what this life that I've had so far, what its meaning has been, to me, and maybe what the lesson could be, if there is one for you, living halfway around the world from where I live, but living together because we're both part of this wonderful universal church that we're so privileged to be members of. And I only know how to talk about this in simple terms. I'm not trained in philosophy or theology. In fact, I've never had a day of Catholic school education. So it sometimes is difficult for me to drill down and analyze and articulate as beautifully as so many of the people here who have been so well trained, and particularly our clergy. But a few principles do emerge in my mind, truths, I think, if you will. And I think, again, it bottoms for me, on the enormous power of prayer. And I'm not able to see it any other way when I think about the absolute desolate, hopeless situations that I've been in my life. The times on that farm, the times when my dad was in this asylum and we had nothing to eat, times when I was up against it academically at West Point, once in Vietnam with a 45 caliber pistol at my head, my business going under, our elections thrown into a cocked hat. My reaction has always been to try to endure and accept it as part of my cross, and to pray. And I am reminded continually of that admonishment of my mother to work hard. And then she said, as we were youngsters, to study hard and always to pray hard. And implicit in that was to never give up, to don't stop ever asking God. Be perseverant. He knows that we're going to have problems. We still have problems. Any family with 7 kids in it, and we now have children of our own, and we have a grandchild, praise God, and 26 nieces and nephews, and alcoholism has a predilection, I think, genetically, and so it still plagues our family, and so there is still so much for us to pray for, but there is so much also for us to take joy in. And so in hunger and in suffering and fear and insecurity and in humiliation, I think there is opportunity to show the redemptive suffering of Christ and our Mother Mary, both for ourselves and for others, and especially for those others for whom we pray, those for whom we want God to help, parents, family, siblings. So it's an unusual privilege for me to come to a convention like this and to be with you and to talk about family and the cross. I've done this through the story of my life. Luke said, when quoting Jesus, "If anyone wishes to come after me, let him take up his cross daily and follow me." And I believe that I have had a daily cross. And there were times in my life when I lamented that, I think, and when I felt sorry for myself about that and didn't see it the way it's now becoming far more clear to me that through this is this redemptive participation with our Lord, who is gentle and lovable and who can make sorrows cease and to make joy obtain, and that we can indeed be co-redeemers with him. So I would like also to pay my respects and my thanks to those in your organization. Particularly, I was so impressed last night with Bishop Pat Dunn and his leadership and his obvious faith and love of you all and of people. The people whose initiative have put together this convention, and there are too many to name, I know, and it's dangerous to do that, but I certainly want to thank John and Beth Porteous. I know Monsignor Cronin has been a key part of it. I'm grateful for the hospitality that we're getting from Dennis and Philippa Orion, and I know Kevin has also been Kevin Sherry, one of your stalwart leaders and organizers. This is a wonderful thing that you have going on here, and we feel so grateful to be here and to be part of it, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow about our time at the Vatican and my time currently as the leader of the second largest department in the United States government, charged with the responsibility of fulfilling President Washington's admonition after the Revolutionary War, which was to repay that debt of honor and gratitude that America owes to its veterans. And so, till tomorrow, thank you and God bless you. Thank you.